Today we're going to learn how to compare and order numbers. Our first vocabulary word is greater than. This is the greater than sign. Greater than means when comparing numbers and one is bigger than the other. 3 is greater than 1. Less than. This is the less than sign. Less than means when comparing numbers and one is smaller than the other. So 1 is less than 3. When looking at the sign, the big end is greater than, and the small end is less. So this would read, this number is greater than this number. So the big opening is the greater than. The small little point is the less than sign. So we read this, 10 is greater than 5, because this is the big opening, it's the greater than. We read this, 5 is less than 10, because 5, and here's the little point, which tells us to say less than 10. Equal to means when two numbers are the same. So 3 is equal to 3. We're going to compare numbers greatest to least. When comparing numbers, we use railroad tracks. The first thing is to find out if you're ordering from greatest to least or least to greatest. This problem is greatest to least, and you'll write on your paper G to the L. Here are my three numbers, 15, 25, 45. I'm going to take those three numbers and put them vertically. So I have 15, 25, 45. Then I'm going to draw my railroad tracks. This helps me, so I'm just going to look at these first three numbers. Then I'm going to figure out, I'm going greatest to least, so I'm looking for the biggest number. So I ask myself, which one's bigger? 1, 2, or 4? 4 is my biggest number, so I'm going to put a number 1. Then I'm going to look at which of these two numbers are greater than. 2 is my next biggest number, and 1 is the least. Now I look at number 1 is 45. 45 was my biggest number. So I will take 45 and put it first. 25 was my next number. So 25 would be next. And then my last number is 15. 45 is greater than 25, and 25 is greater than 15. This is the greatest to the least in order. Now we're going to try 3-digit numbers. Again, I take 134, 137, 296, and I write it vertically so I can compare them. I want the numbers up and down so I can draw my railroad track. I start right here, and I look, I'm going greatest to least, G to the L. So I'm looking for the biggest number. 1 and 2, which one's the bigger number? 2, so I put a number 1. And now I'm done with this number. Now I go back here and I look 1 and 1. I can't compare 1 and 1, they are equal. So I come next door and I draw my railroad track and I stop because I'm done with this number. So now I'm just looking at 3 and 3. I can't compare 3 and 3 because they are equal, so I have to keep going. Then I look at 4 and 7 and I'm going greatest. So which one's bigger, 4 or 7? 7 is bigger, so I'm going to put a 2. And then this would be my 3. Looking at my last number, it's very important you remember that you are not comparing the 6 anymore. We have already used this number, so I would just be looking at the 4 and the 7. Now I take my number 1, which is 296, and I write that first. Then I find my number 2, which is 137. And then my 3 is 134. So now my numbers are in order from greatest to least. And 296 should be greater than 137, and 137 is greater than 134. Now we're going to look at comparing numbers least to greatest. Again, we take these 3 numbers and we write them vertically so we can do our railroad tracks. Least to greatest, I'm going to write L to the G. Write my numbers and draw my railroad tracks. I'm just looking at these first 3 numbers that are on the left side of my railroad track. 1, 4, and 1. And I have to remember I'm looking for the least, so the smallest. So 1 and 1 are smaller. I can't compare 1 and 1, so I have to go next door. I have 9 and 7. I am not looking at the 6 because 4 was not in my least amount right here. 1 and 1 was. So 9 and 7, again, least is smallest. Which one's smaller? 7 or 9? Again, I'm not looking at the 6 because we're not looking at that number. We're looking at the ones that start with 1. 7 and 9. 7 will be my smallest. We're done with that. And 9 will be my second smallest. Then I go back to the beginning and I see that 4 is the only one left, and that is my biggest number. And again, I'm going least to greatest, so 3 meaning that is my biggest number. Number 1, 17 is my smallest number. And then 19 was my number 2. And 46 was my number 3. My numbers are now from the least to the greatest. L to the G. So 17 is smaller than 19. And 19 is smaller than 46. Let's try it with 3-digit numbers. Again, I take these 3 numbers and write them vertically so I can draw my railroad track. Draw my railroad track, and I notice that all my numbers are the same. They're equal, so I have to go next door. I keep in all of these numbers because all 3 of them start with 1. And I go next door, draw my railroad track, and I see that I have 7 and 9. Which one's the least or the smallest? And 7 is the smallest, so number 1, and I'm done using this number. I go back to the beginning and I see 1s, so I have to go next door. And I have 9s, I have to keep going. 5 and 0, and I have to remember I'm looking for the least, so which one's the smallest? 0 is the smallest, then 5. Now I take my number 1, and I write 172. My number 2 is 190. And my last one is 195. Again, this is L to the G. So 172 should be less than 190. 190 should be less than 195. Again, this small point is saying less than. Let's try even bigger numbers. I've taken my 3 numbers and I've wrote them down here. I make sure my numbers line up. I cannot put another number in the place value. I can't put 2 numbers in one spot. So nice and neat, they're lined up. That's very important when you start using a lot of numbers. Draw my railroad track, and I'm going least to the greatest, L to the G. So I can't compare 1s, Go next door. Now look, which one's smaller, 2 or 7? And that's 2. So I'm going to draw my line here, and I'm not going to include the bottom number because that is not part of the numbers I'm comparing anymore, because I got rid of it when I said 2's were smaller than 7. So 4's I can't compare. Go next door and I say, okay, which one's smaller? Which one's the least? 5 or 7? Which one's smaller? 5. Done with that one. And then my 7 would be smaller. And then my last number left would be the bottom one. Put them in order. 12,459 is my first. Next comes 12,479. And my last one is 17,249. So that is in least to the greatest. Let's try one more. Again, I've taken these numbers and I write them vertically. One number in each place value. They are nice and neat so I can compare. Draw my railroad tracks and I'm looking from greatest to least, G to the L. So which one's bigger, 4 or 2? 4 is bigger, so right away I can write 1 and I'm done with that number. Then I go back to the beginning and I say 2 and 2, they're the same. Draw my railroad tracks. 9 and 9, I can't compare. Draw my railroad tracks. Again, I don't go all the way up because I'm done with this number. And at 8 and 7, I have to remember I'm looking for the greatest, the biggest number, 8 or 7. 8 is bigger, so 2, and then 3. So I'd order my numbers. 45,878 is my biggest. Then 29,876 is next. And then 29,765 is my least number. This is greatest to least. Now it's your turn to try to order some numbers. Very important that you remember, are you going greatest to least or least to greatest? Because if you number those, if you order those numbers perfect, but you went least to greatest and it asked you greatest to least, then it will be wrong. So make sure you read those directions. You're going to go ahead and take these ones from least to greatest, these 3 numbers, and then these 3 numbers from greatest to least. Write them on your paper vertically, draw your railroad tracks, number them, rewrite them on the side in order, and then turn this paper into your teacher when you're done.